The soft light of the early spring sun filtered into the luxurious residential neighborhood of Brooklyn. Melissa Wilson observed the magnolia blossoms flourishing in her garden through the large window and let out a deep sigh. Despite her success as a high-end real estate agent, she still hadn't found her place in this exclusive neighborhood. After graduating from Boston University, she had built a 10-year career in real estate and was now at the top of the industry. However, even with all these achievements, her profession was still seen as somewhat vulgar in the eyes of the Wilson family. "I think I'll skip dinner with your mom this week," said Ethan, looking up from his laptop while sitting on the living room sofa. "Again? Melissa, Mom has been worried about you." "Yes, I know." But Melissa's words trailed off as she tried to hide the turmoil in her heart. 3 years after their wedding, Patricia Wilson's cold gaze hadn't softened one bit. It was clear she still saw her as the woman who had ruined her son's life. "That's not true," Ethan denied immediately, although his voice lacked conviction. Without fail, every Sunday after Mass, Patricia would bring up news about Julia, Ethan's childhood friend, a Harvard graduate, and now a pediatrician at a prestigious hospital. She was the ideal daughter-in-law Patricia had always wanted. Julia lived in an exclusive neighborhood, had a successful career, and was married to a loving man. On the surface, Melissa's life seemed perfect, but the fact that she came from a middle-class family in Minnesota seemed to be an indelible stain in Patricia's eyes. Things had been a little more bearable when her father-in-law, Thomas, was still alive. Just 6 months ago, the kind chief of neurosurgery at Broyhill General Hospital had been the one to silently moderate his wife's behavior. But since his death, Patricia's controlling nature had only intensified. Despite his busy schedule as a senior vice president at a tech company, Ethan never missed his weekly dinners with his mother. Meanwhile, Melissa had reduced her contact with her mother-in-law to about once a month. Melissa stood up and walked toward her husband, who was by the window. In her hand she held a small envelope. "We're going to have a baby." Ethan's face lit up with surprise and joy. "Really?" "Yes, 7 weeks pregnant." 2 years of fertility treatments had finally borne fruit. Ethan stood up and embraced Melissa with trembling arms. Thank you so much." Melissa had mixed feelings about when and how they should give this happy news to Patricia. Her mother-in-law, president of the Church Women's Association and dedicated to charitable activities, was outwardly an elegant and merciful woman. However, behind that mask hid an abnormal attachment to her son and a morbid obsession with traditional values. As one of the central figures in Holy Trinity Church, Patricia was always aware of the gazes of others and obsessed with maintaining an impeccable image. How would she react to this news? "We should tell your mom soon," Ethan said. "Yes, of course. Let's tell her at dinner this weekend." Melissa smiled and nodded, but anxiety swirled in her chest. How would this happy event affect her relationship with her mother-in-law? No one could predict. The soft lamplight illuminated the private room of the exclusive French restaurant, Lamb Saran. On the table rested an elegant portion of foie gras. The Chateau Mouton Rothschild 1982 reflected a deep glow. Patricia straightened her back and placed the napkin on her lap with impeccable posture. "Congratulations on your promotion to vice president, Ethan. As your mother, I couldn't be more proud." "Thank you, Mom," Ethan replied with a smile. Melissa looked into her husband's eyes and nodded slightly. The moment had come to say it. "Actually, we have some good news," Melissa began softly. "We're going to have a baby." For a moment the air seemed to freeze. Patricia's hand trembled slightly before Ethan continued. "We confirmed it recently with medical tests." Patricia's expression slowly changed. Her smile was perfect, like that of an actor on stage. "Oh, how wonderful!" she exclaimed. "We must celebrate." She beckoned the waiter to bring champagne. Melissa felt an indescribable unease at her mother-in-law's sudden warmth. Something about that reaction didn't seem natural. The next morning, the doorbell rang unexpectedly. "Good morning, Melissa." Patricia was standing at the entrance, dressed in an impeccable Chanel suit and holding a Hermès Birkin bag. "I brought you a gift for the baby, for your safety and the child's." Melissa frowned and looked past her mother-in-law. Parked in front of the house, a new Volvo XC90 gleamed in the morning light. "Mother, this is too much. It's a very expensive car." "Nonsense." Patricia said with a nonchalant wave. It's for my first grandchild. It has all the latest safety features. I've already put it in your name. Patricia circled the vehicle enthusiastically, explaining each of its features in detail. There was something obsessive in her tone. The braking system is the most advanced on the market. The collision avoidance system. Even the seatbelt tension adjusts automatically. Despite her mixed feelings, Melissa thought this might be an opportunity to improve her relationship with Patricia. Perhaps, after all, her mother-in-law was really changing. Ethan was as happy as a child. Thank you, Mom. Let's test drive it. A few days later, Melissa went shopping with the new car. She consulted on postpartum nutrition at Whole Foods and bought organic ingredients. Her heart filled with expectations for the new life that was about to begin. On the way home, something went wrong. As she approached the Brooklyn Avenue intersection and pressed the brake pedal, the car didn't slow down. If anything, it seemed to accelerate. She tried to stay calm, breathing deeply, but the pedal didn't respond. It was dead. The intersection was approaching. The traffic light changed from yellow to red. Stop! Please! She screamed desperately. She pulled the emergency brake, but it didn't work either. She honked and turned on the hazard lights, but she saw a large truck entering the intersection. The blare of horns, the screech of tires. Baby, I'm sorry. A violent impact, the sound of breaking glass, airbags deploying. Everything felt like it was in slow motion. Just before losing consciousness, Melissa saw something strange on the other side of the intersection. A black Mercedes was parked there. When she opened her eyes, she was in a private hospital room. A pure white ceiling, the smell of disinfectant, the sound of a drip. Everything felt disturbingly quiet. You're awake, said a nurse softly. The baby? Melissa asked hoarsely. The nurse's expression clouded. She didn't need to say anything more. At that moment, the room door opened. Patricia entered in her usual impeccable attire, carrying an elegant floral arrangement from a luxury brand. Melissa, that must have been terrible. Her voice had an unnatural brightness. She leaned in and, with an icy smile, whispered in her ear. The baby's gone. Now my son is free. Melissa looked at her, suppressing the pain throughout her body. Although her voice trembled, her words were clear. You'll regret this smile for the rest of your life. Patricia's expression froze for a moment but quickly recovered, and she left the room with her usual grace. In Melissa's eyes, a silent flame of determination ignited. This was not the end. It was just beginning. 2 weeks later, in early August, Melissa sat in her home office with her laptop open. On the screen was the Boston Police Department's accident report. She shook her head as she read the conclusion. Sudden system failure. This is too perfect. There were too many things that didn't add up in the police investigation. Everything seemed too convenient. The scene had been superficially examined, security camera footage was partially missing, and Patricia's behavior was, to say the least, suspicious. Melissa picked up her phone and dialed a saved number. Jim Collins Detective Agency. Hello, this is Melissa Wilson. From the other side, a warm, deep voice answered. Mrs. Wilson, I heard the rumors. Can we meet this afternoon? Melissa visited an old office building near Boston Public Garden. Golden letters on the door read James Collins Private Investigations. Welcome. Jim Collins was a well-built man over 60. After a 20-year career in the police force, he had added 15 more as a private investigator. Behind his kind expression were sharp, analytical eyes. Do you think anyone will believe me? Melissa asked softly. Jim sighed deeply. During my time as police chief, I saw cases like this many times. Accidents that ended in superficial investigations, and the darkness behind them. Melissa told him every detail of the accident and her suspicion of Patricia. Jim listened attentively, taking notes from time to time. Let the investigation begin, he said gravely. But promise me something. Your husband mustn't know anything about this. Melissa nodded. I understand. Ethan would never believe it. The investigation progressed cautiously but steadily. Jim used his connections as a former police chief to obtain all the surveillance recordings around the accident scene. He also collected detailed analyses of maintenance records from the Volvo dealership and the accident vehicle. In mid-September, they made their first major discovery. Look at this. Jim pointed to his laptop screen. The recording showed someone who appeared to be Patricia meeting with a middle-aged man dressed in work clothes in an alley. It was the night before the accident. An exchange of money could be clearly seen. That man is a mechanic from the Volvo dealership, Jim explained. His name is Mike Johnson. He has over 20 years of experience. Through subsequent surveillance, his history came to light. Mike had debts, a gambling-addicted wife, and $100,000 in cash from Patricia Wilson. The pieces were beginning to fit. I'm going to talk to him, Jim said. On a cold night in early October, Mike approached a car in the parking lot of his apartment complex. Jim was sitting in the driver's seat. Get in, he ordered in a calm but firm voice. Mike tensed. Who are you? Former Police Chief Jim Collins. I know all about your past and about your present. The color drained from Mike's face. Let's talk about the $100,000 you received from Patricia Wilson and the modification to the braking system. Mike swallowed hard, his lips trembling. She threatened me. I needed the money for my daughter's surgery. If you tell everything, there may be a chance to reduce your sentence, Jim advised. But if you remain silent. That night, Mike confessed everything. The contact with Patricia, how he modified the braking system, the guilt of knowing what would happen and still keeping silent. The evidence accumulated quickly. Mike's confession, the security camera recordings, the tools used for the manipulation of the vehicle, the cash transaction records, and most importantly, a handwritten memo by Patricia. She probably thought it was a perfect plan, Jim said as he organized the documents. But there's no such thing as a perfect crime in this world. At the end of October, everything was ready. Melissa, with a firm voice but laden with repressed emotions, uttered the words she had been holding back for so long. We're going to report it to the police. There were no more doubts. All the evidence was handed over to the Boston Police Department. Detective Marcus Brown, in charge of the case, reviewed the materials with a stern expression. At the end, he let out a deep sigh. This is clearly attempted murder. One Sunday in early November, a charity event organized by Patricia was taking place at Holy Trinity Church. The atmosphere was filled with elegant music as high society ladies and gentlemen conversed over glasses of wine. Then the door opened, and several police officers entered silently. Detective Marcus stepped forward with a firm gait. Mrs. Patricia Wilson, he announced, you are under arrest for attempted murder. The place erupted in chaos. Patricia maintained her serene demeanor, even smiling elegantly. Don't be ridiculous, she said disdainfully. But her expression began to crumble as the detective presented the evidence, and when she saw the handwritten memo, her face lost all its color. The click of the handcuffs echoed through the church hall. Patricia's screams mingled with the astonished expressions of the guests. Melissa, however, watched everything in complete silence. She knew the worst was yet to come. That same night, in the living room of her house, Melissa placed all the evidence on the table in front of Ethan. Your mother tried to kill me and the baby. Ethan remained motionless. The security camera footage, the mechanic's testimony, the memo written by his own mother. Everything was there. Everything was undeniable. It's a lie, Ethan murmured, his voice trembling. Mom would never do something like this. But then Melissa pressed play on her phone. It was the recording of Patricia in the hospital room, whispering in her ear. The baby's gone. Now my son is free. Ethan's face turned pale. Days later, in the Norfolk County Superior Court, the atmosphere was charged with solemnity. Prosecutor Sarah Murphy prepared to speak. Prosecutor Sarah Murphy spoke firmly. I will proceed to read the charges against the defendant, Patricia Wilson. Her voice resonated in the courtroom. 1 count of attempted murder, 1 count of property damage, 1 count of fraud. The defendant? Under meticulous planning. Patricia sat in the front row, wearing an impeccable designer suit. She maintained an elegant posture, but the trembling in her hands betrayed her inner turmoil. Her defense attorney, Robert Stein, one of the most prestigious and expensive in Boston, stood up calmly. Ms. Wilson's actions were motivated solely by her concern for her son, he declared in a controlled voice. Even the results of the psychiatric evaluation demonstrate this. Melissa narrowed her eyes from the gallery. Ethan, sitting next to her, squeezed her hand tightly. The witness questioning began. The first to take the stand was Mike Johnson, the mechanic. I received $100,000 from Mrs. Patricia. He began to testify in a trembling voice. I was ordered to tamper with the car's braking system. Please indicate the specific instructions, the prosecutor asked. Mike swallowed. To make it look like an accident. His voice cracked. To ensure. To ensure what? To ensure that the fetus. The room fell into a deathly silence. One by one, the witnesses presented their evidence. A technician analyzed the security camera footage near the accident scene. The emergency room doctor explained the state in which Melissa arrived at the hospital. Each testimony made the truth more evident. During the recess, Ethan whispered to Melissa in the hallway, "Something's wrong with my mother." Melissa didn't answer, but she knew it. Patricia was no longer the woman he remembered. Her perfect lady facade was beginning to crack. In the afternoon, Patricia's questioning began. I didn't do anything wrong, she answered with dignity. I was only trying to protect my family from someone who could ruin my son's life. Then why did you order the vehicle's brakes to be modified? The prosecutor pressed. Patricia's face wavered for an instant. My son should have married someone suitable, someone with education, with an impeccable family background. Her voice turned colder. Everything you call attempted murder, I call protecting my family. Her expression began to distort. Protect? The prosecutor repeated. And how much damage could someone of low class like Melissa cause to your perfect world? Her, and that child she was carrying in her womb. The courtroom erupted in murmurs and shouts of indignation. The judge banged his gavel on the table. Order in the courtroom. Then a firm voice broke the silence. Mother. All eyes turned towards Ethan. He looked at Patricia with a mixture of horror and sadness. When did you become this person? Patricia was speechless. Ethan, all this was for you. Shut up. Ethan stood up. You've been completely different since Dad died. But to go this far. I only wanted your happiness. Happiness. Her voice sounded icy. Mother, you tried to kill my wife and my son. How did you think that would make me happy? Patricia's perfect mask finally broke. Her face turned pale. Her hands trembled. No, all this is wrong. And then Patricia started screaming. A professor at Harvard University. His schedules had become more regular. Dad. Alice ran to him with open arms. Ethan lifted her into the air easily, laughing. My little snowman artist. Melissa watched them tenderly from the doorway. Ethan approached and hugged her gently. How was your day? Quiet. Alice and I baked cookies. Chocolate chip, the ones you love. Melissa smiled. Ethan sighed with relief, enjoying the warmth of his home. Years had passed since that trial. Since the day they closed the door on their past and began a new life. Boston and high society were far away, like a faded memory in time. The snow continued to fall outside, covering everything with its white mantle. While inside the house, the warmth of a happy family filled the air. They were finally at peace. Since Ethan became CEO, work had become even busier. But he never neglected time with his family. Dad. Alice ran to him. Oh, this is a snowman. Ethan lifted his daughter with a smile. It's very well made. Can I open my Christmas presents? She asked excitedly. That's for tomorrow morning, Melissa explained gently. The three of them entered the living room, bathed in a warm light. Under the enormous Christmas tree were Alice's presents. The fire in the fireplace softly illuminated the room. Ethan turned to his wife. Everything ready for the final adoption interview next week? Melissa nodded. Yes, the meetings with Noah, who will be Alice's brother, have been going well. He's also excited about being part of our family. Meanwhile, at a rehabilitation center, the Maplewood Care Center on the outskirts of Boston, Patricia Wilson looked out the window from her wheelchair. Mrs. Wilson, it's time for your medicine, a nurse called. There was no answer. After landing in prison in her 4th year and becoming paraplegic, she now lived in this rehabilitation center after being granted parole. There was no trace of the dignified appearance she once had. Numerous letters she had sent piled up in her room, all returned with the same mark. Address unknown. Ethan had completely changed his address and cut all ties with his mother. "Ma'am, it's time for dinner," said a caregiver. Patricia murmured, her gaze lost. "Today's a special day. Christmas Eve. We used to spend it as a family." Her words trailed off. The happy memories now only brought her pain. In the hallway, some young nurses murmured among themselves. From the window of her room at Maplewood Center, Patricia could see the nearby park. Entire families laughed and chatted cheerfully. Tears slid down her face. "Merry Christmas, Ethan," she whispered, but no one heard her. Her words were trapped in the cold glass of the window. Meanwhile, in the Cambridge house, the atmosphere was warm and familiar. "Dad?" Alice asked as he read her a picture book on his lap. "Where's Grandma?" An uncomfortable silence filled the room. Melissa looked at Ethan with concern. Ethan replied softly, "Your grandma went far away. We can't see her anymore. And that's how it has to be." "That's why," Melissa added gently, "sometimes even adults make wrong decisions, but we learn from them and try to become a better family." After thinking for a moment, Alice smiled and said, "I'm glad to be Mom and Dad's daughter." Ethan and Melissa looked at each other and smiled. The scars certainly remained, but the happiness they had found in overcoming them was irreplaceable. The night progressed. Alice went to her room early, saying she had to sleep before Santa arrived. Ethan and Melissa were left alone in the living room. The fire in the fireplace flickered silently. "Next year will be our first Christmas as a family of 4, Melissa said. "Yes," Ethan replied, taking his wife's hand. "I try not to think about Mom anymore, but sometimes when I see Alice's smile, I remember again the magnitude of her mistakes." Ethan's mother had lost sight of what true happiness was. There were more important things than social status or family background. Melissa leaned silently against Ethan. Outside, large snowflakes fell. The city lights shone fantastically through the white curtain. "Hey," Melissa whispered. "Our family story is just beginning." "You're right," Ethan smiled. "The path my mother chose was too sad, but we took a different course." The fire in the fireplace softly cast their shadows on the wall. Meanwhile, at the rehabilitation center, a single light remained on in Patricia's room. She continued looking out the window. The price she had paid for seeking perfection had been too high. Now all she had left was regret and a time she could never get back. But life went on. In the Cambridge house, Alice dreamt of Christmas hugging her pillow. Melissa and Ethan talked about the future of their new family. Next year, Noah would join them. The story of this family continued. The shadows of the past still existed, but they turned them into lessons that strengthened their bonds with love and understanding. Perhaps that was the true victory. Outside, the Christmas snow gently enveloped all the stories in its embrace.